First and foremost, welcome everyone to the final Faculty Career Impact Program session of Fall 2020. We're super excited to have Professor Glenn Edens with us today. He has an absolutely amazing background. He's a total Thunderbird. Even though he didn't go here, he has the Thunderbird mystique written all over him. So we're super excited he's here. He teaches innovation, and we're really excited to learn from him. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and I can moderate that for you. Raise your hand, and I'll be checking on that. Or you can come off mute whenever you're ready. So Professor Edens, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, Sarah, thank you so much for the invitation, and great to see everyone. And gosh, I'm honored to be the last. Where would you like me to start?
Yeah, just go ahead and go over your background, kind of your career path, because I know it's incredible. And then you can maybe get into, some innovation and, a little bit about what you're doing at Thunderbird, and then we can answer questions.
Okay, great. So let me first correct the record on one item. The invitation called me Dr. Edens, and I actually don't have a real PhD. So just to make sure we're all clear on that. Don't ever want to exaggerate about something like that. I've been lucky, and I've had a career that has spanned way too many decades. And I joke that I've had 3 lives. I don't know if I'll get 9 like a cat. And then Dean Kagman always points out that I've actually had 4 lives. So one of my lives is as a researcher. So I've been lucky to work in some of the largest and best corporate research labs in the world. And I've been honored to run a few of them. I've had a second life as an entrepreneur. I've started 7 companies. And so far, only one of them had been put to sleep. One of them is still going, and the other 5 were all had an exit or were sold. I'll talk about those in a second. My third life has been as a corporate venture capitalist. So I've been working in both a very large corporate venture fund and a very large family office. And then, as Dean Kagman points out, my fourth life, and I've always loved teaching, is as faculty. And I've been really honored to be teaching at Thunderbird. I teach currently the Global Innovation TGM 598 elective, and it's a really fun class. So a little bit about background. I started life as a kid thinking I wanted to be an architect. And I quote, knew I wanted to be an architect from when I was 7 years old. And that pretty much lasted until I got to architecture school. And what I learned at architecture school was that architecture, while it's a beautiful profession and it combines art and technology, it's kind of a hard career. And the other thing that dawned on me when I got to architecture school was this is all manual. We were still doing all our drawings with pen and paper. And I felt at that time, and this is like 1970 or so, 1969, 1970, I felt that there was probably a role that computers could play in architecture. And I went and discussed this with my faculty advisor, and he was a very famous architect, Joel Sanders, wrote a book, co-authored a book called The Universal Traveler, which was a big deal in architecture back then. And basically he looked at me and said, well, Glenn, if you really believe that, maybe you shouldn't be in architecture school, which really stunned me. And so I switched to EE, electronics engineering, because that was the closest thing you could do to computers back then. So I started life as an architect. I then got very lucky and got an internship at Xerox. That led to a position right when Xerox Palo Alto Research Center was being created. It was started in 1970. I got asked to join in 1971. Now, if you do the math there, you will quickly figure it out that, wow, how did he squeeze school into that? And Xerox's offer was they would continue to pay for my school if I would come to work for them. And I have mixed emotions about that. I think it was a good idea, but the ultimate result of that is I actually did not ever finish my degree program, and I do not recommend that path. And I don't even think today that it's an option. But we'll come back to that. So really quickly, I had a great career at Xerox. I later went to National Semiconductor because I wanted to learn how integrated circuits and chips were designed. I later then got a call from Steve Jobs, who invited me to come work for Apple Computer. So I was employee number 195 at Apple. Apple hadn't even moved into its second building yet. So it was a wonderful time to be at Apple. I then got the idea to do my first startup, and I actually took the idea to Apple first. I thought that Apple should do a portable computer. And we actually talked about it a lot. At that time, I had helped start the Lisa project. Macintosh was just getting off the ground. And we had the Apple III, which was the big disaster, which Apple never talks about. And we had the Apple II, which was really successful. So I proposed that we should start another project to do a portable computer. And even Steve thought it was a good idea, but when we got through all the meetings to discuss it, we decided that Apple just had too much on their plate, and that it really didn't make sense to pursue that. So I went and was having lunch with a mentor of mine, a person named Gene Amdahl, who had started Amdahl Computer. Gene had invented what was called the IBM 360 computer at IBM. So Gene was an amazing mentor. And I was telling him this whole story at lunch, and not to make this too long a story, over lunch, he took out his checkbook and he wrote me a $50,000 check, which in that year was a unbelievable amount of money. And he said, you can cash this check if you use it to start a company. And so he was basically daring me to leave Apple and go start a company. So I quickly got together with a really good friend of mine, and together we started Grid Systems, where we did the first laptop computer. We started Grid we started the company in 1979, but we really didn't get it going until 1980. Also at Grid, we did the first tablet computer. We did the first personal digital assistant, and a company called Palm, which many of you may remember, did personal digital assistants. Palm was actually a spin out of Grid. So that transition led to Grid, and doing a startup got me hooked on startups forever. And just really briefly, the research life, I started at Xerox PARC. I later did a stint at Paul Allen's Interval Research Corporation. I later worked at AT&T Laboratories. I worked at Hewlett Packard as chief scientist, and I actually ran HP Labs as an interim director for 6 months. And then I ran Sun Microsystems Global Laboratories for many years. Sun, many of you know, computer company. And then I got asked to go back to Xerox PARC. So I had left Xerox PARC in 1976, and I was invited to go back in 2012. In between that, I did a bunch of other startups. At AT&T, I was president of AT&T Ventures, which is where I got to learn all about corporate venture capital. At the time, we were the largest corporate venture capital fund in the world. We had $2.7 billion that we were managing. And the good news is, didn't screw up. That fund did really well. Prior to that, I worked for Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, both at his research lab and his venture capital fund. And then really quickly, lastly, I did another startup in the audio and video editing world, which really changed how music and motion pictures and television are made. We got an Oscar for that. We sold that company to Adobe. I started another company in the cellular industry. That company, Range Networks, literally just got sold a couple weeks ago to a big mobile operator in the UK that operates hundreds and hundreds of cities in Africa. So I've been really lucky. I've gotten to do hardware, software, venture capital investing, research, and teaching. So in a nutshell, that's my kind of weird path.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for
So, Sierra,
your
the last joke I'll tell before we get to questions is what you can learn from that is I can't hold a job, is my joke about it.
That's okay. I can't either. So I'm glad that that gives me hope for being someone that can go far in life. So I know you taught global innovation last spring. I know you're teaching that now. Are you also teaching it this coming spring as well?
I think so. Right now, Dr. Booth and Dr. Teagarden are working on the curriculum schedule for next semester, and they've asked if I would be available to do it. I am available, so if we can get enough students, we will offer global innovation in the spring.
Awesome. I just went ahead and sent that in the chat to everyone. That is a TGM 598 class. So there's a ton of TGM 598s for all of the first years that are unaware. Basically, 598 is the code for any class that's new or within the first, I think, 3 semesters or something like that. So yeah, so I put that in the chat for everyone. Go ahead and look that up. I know registration just recently opened. We did have a hand raised, but I think it went, oh, here we go. Brittany, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just curious because you made the joke about not being able to keep a job, but in your experience, when is the right time to leave a job, or like what felt right to you?
Brittany, that's a great question. I like environments that are either new, rapidly growing things or companies that are in trouble. And to me, that's the most fun time to be at a company. So with the startups, it's usually pretty natural when it's time to bring in the next management team. And so with a startup, it's actually pretty easy. You move from CEO to maybe being chairman of the board or being an advisor, but usually it's when the investors want to bring in the next level of management. So that's pretty easy. Corporate America is a little different. And usually when I've left, it's because I got a phone call and the new offer was just too compelling. I did leave Xerox the first time because they wanted me to move to Dallas. And I went to Dallas for 2 weeks and I decided that wasn't for me. And luckily I already had an offer from National Semiconductor. I left National because I got this call from Steve Jobs. And even though it was 1978, who could refuse a call from Steve? But most of the times when I've left, it's because a new offer came up and I felt comfortable that I had done most of what I could do to help transform or fix whatever problem I was hired to work on for the previous company. I haven't been fired yet. I think they're running out of time to do that. So
that's great. Thank you so much. So Jen Calloway says, Professor Edens, what do you feel about the implications of environmental, social, and governance, ESG, and corporate social responsibility, of course, CSR, on the realm of technology and innovation?
Gosh, those are 2 big questions. First, the ESG one. I mean, that one is so long overdue. And, politicizing the state of the planet is unfortunately sad, and it's gotten in the way of solving real problems. I think through the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, most large corporations were able to get away with pretty awful acts of how they used or wasted resources. And if you just look at things like look into the history of what it took to get lead out of gasoline and lead out of paint, just as an example. Or look at the history of how long it took to get tobacco consumption under control. So, and look at the state of the chemical industry today. So it's a hard problem, getting governments to have the courage to balance the future of the planet and commerce is really tough. And sadly, 8 times out of 10, they make the wrong decision. So I think it's critical. I think CSR is a different issue because the social responsibility issue is one that, how could the companies argue that? That one they don't really need regulation to fix. So I've been lucky. I've worked at mostly really good companies who had strong social responsibility programs. And I've never I've been lucky to not work in the chemical industry or, some of even the construction industry. I mean, if the construction industry, which is our built environment, right? The buildings we live and work in, I don't know, many of you may know, it represents about 33%, almost a third of greenhouse gases. And that's one that is actually easier to fix than the fossil fuel problem. So I think both are important. They both have different issues why they're taking so long. And I'm certainly hoping as all of you graduate and move into leadership positions that you'll do a better job of fixing it.
I definitely hope we will as well. So I know we have a couple questions in the chat, but I did see that William did have his hand up. So William, go ahead.
Okay. And we got some
great
chat.
line. Wow. Thanks. Thank you so much. What an incredible story. I was just wondering if you could, how do you teach this? How do you teach innovation in a way? Because you have this incredible story that kind of has to do with breaking from tradition and breaking from, I mean, what's your method for showing us how to do this?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So my thesis, start there, is that there are many kinds of innovation, right? There's business model innovation, funding innovation, marketing and promotion, right? There's at least 10 kinds of innovation that you can clearly identify. However, in the 21st century, almost all innovation, irregardless of what type it is going to have a strong technology component behind it. It's just unavoidable, right? Computers, software, algorithms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, they're all just part of our lives, and that's not going to change. And hopefully it's part of that is the root of solving some problems as well as the problems it's creating. So my first thesis is to try to help students understand the real world process of how ideas move from the epiphany and the spark to actually becoming implementations and innovations, to talk about the different ways that innovation is actually funded, to talk about how markets actually evolve and what's actually behind competition. And over the years, we developed a model called Designing Disruption. And the two questions are, why is disruption always a surprise? And can you design disruption? In other words, is disruption or strategic strategies that are disruptive, can they be designed just like products and user interfaces? And so the last part of my answer for you is, spoiler alert, the answer to both those questions, disruption should not be a surprise. It's largely predictable. And number two, it is designable. It is a design problem, just like product design. And so through the project you go through, we actually have you go through the whole step of analyzing an industry, coming to conclusions, and trying to validate them. And Sierra and Kelly both lived through the course. So I don't know if they have anything to add.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was definitely a course that challenged us. And my group actually ended up taking our project into Professor Shields' global startup class this
Which
fall.
is really cool.
So then, yeah, so we went from the innovation aspect to doing everything to build it. It's put on hold right now because it's a little crazy, but it would be amazing if we could end up getting that off the ground at some point.
Cool.
But I definitely recommend his class 100%.
Thanks.
If you're really interested in innovation, it's definitely one to check out. So Diana, I see your hand up, but let me go to one from the chat really quick. So Gianluca says, did you manage to match some of your IT projects with architecture related projects as you were funding startups over the years, or did you just give up architecture altogether?
No, I'm still a member of AIA, the American Institute of Architects, and I'm still involved in that world. I was very lucky and got a summer job. It was not an internship. Going to be very careful with words here. In high school, I was very lucky and I got a summer job with the design firm of Charles and Ray Eames, EAMES, which many of you may have heard of. They're furniture designers. They were product designers. They were, Charles and Ray were amazing. And that actually was that was really lucky because my high school counselors were trying to get me to either pick art or pick a career in science, but there was no way to do both. And what I learned from that summer job at Charles and Ray Eames Design was, wow, they're totally related. You can't separate them. And, at Apple, who has really built the company with design as part of, their basic DNA. And they've really done, they've outperformed other companies, and other companies who've done design have done the same thing. So I've kept a foot both in experience design, user experience design. I've been lucky to work on a couple of architecture projects. Real quickly, working for Paul Allen when he decided to do the Experience Music Project Museum in Seattle. We're sitting around the table and he goes, Glenn, you're interested in architecture? And I said, yeah. And he says, okay, you're in charge of the selection committee to pick the architect, which got me the chance to work with Frank Gehry. So I've kept one foot in it, and I've done a bunch of projects in construction as well and how to modernize it. So I've kept one foot in it.
That's really cool. Okay, before we go back to the chat, Diana, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Hi, Diana.
Hello, Professor Edens. I'm Diana from Peru. I would like to have your observations and reflections about innovation in developing countries.
So does everyone on the call know what open source software is? It's software that's done by a community, and it's a really important part of the software world. And part of my answer, that's a great question, Diana, is I bet most of you don't know where most of the actual lines of code for open software are written and where most of the bugs of open source software. And these are databases, the Linux operating system, the LibreOffice suite. I mean, there's just thousands of pieces of open source software. The two countries that have written the most lines of open source software are South Africa and Latvia in the Baltics. And so I think the beauty of where we are with technology is you can have technical innovation now anywhere in the world. And there really are very few barriers other than maybe political stability, because it's kind of hard to work, if you're in a country that's unfortunately undergoing, traumatic change. But I see innovation everywhere. And I think the beauty of the internet, high tech, and software is that is a very level playing field. And anyone in any country, I mean, two acquaintances of mine started the company called Angry Birds, which is, became a really popular video game for a while on phones and other platforms. Peter Vestabacher and his friend, they started that in Finland, which is clearly a developed country, but actually at the time they were actually living in the Baltics, and they took advantage of the incredible software. It's almost a culture in Latvia. Your best course to improve your own lifestyle is to become a software engineer. So I think it can happen anywhere, and it's really exciting that all these borders are coming down. And look at Cuba. Cuba is probably ahead of every other researcher on the planet in cancer research, which is just an amazing story.
Thank you, Professor.
Sure.
So we have a question from the chat from Jorin. It says, what do you think is the best innovation theory?
What we teach in TGM 598 Global Innovation, of course.
Oh, perfect.
You know, there's so many and they're all useful. And one of the things we do in the course is we actually do a little survey of, you know, some of the different methodologies. I think a short answer is the Bell Labs innovation model is probably the one that is practiced throughout most of the world. And it's, you know, basic research to applied research to advanced development, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you can do that agile, you can do that many different ways, but that whole process of how you move from science to inventions that become innovations that we all use, that one's pretty tried and true. And while there's been refinements with agile and other management processes, that basic structure has not been improved on yet. And at the same time, I'll just add that startups are as important as multinational corporations, which are as important as government spending, right? You need all three to really solve all the problems that are out there. So I know that was a little bit of a safe answer, but I hope it was an answer.
Kind of along the same lines, and I'm not sure how much you can go into this, but Jen says, can you review what tenets of your global innovation course next semester you feel are the most important or that you're most passionate about?
Oh gosh, well, I think that innovation is the main way that society solves its problems. So I think the skills that you need, irrespective of my particular class, and certainly this fits well with, you know, what you learn at Thunderbird, the skills you need to critically think about a problem, right? Really define what is the problem, define the space of alternative solutions, and do that in an interdisciplinary way, because you don't really know where the solutions are going to come from. I mean, one thing that made Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, so productive back in the 70s and early 80s, I mean, PARC invented so many things that we're still using today. And the reason was it was interdisciplinary. So at PARC, we had chemists, we had physicists, we had software engineers, we had hardware engineers, we had product designers, we had artists, we had ethnographers, we had sociologists. So I think one of the most important things is to be interdisciplinary. And then the second most important thing, which is covered more in the course, is to have a really clear understanding by taking the big view of what's actually happening in an industry and really understanding, why does the disruption occur and why is it ignored, or why is it fought, or, you know, what could you do to defend against it if you needed to, although my bet is always on the disruptors. So I think it's about the spark of individuals, and do they have a roadmap for doing really critical thinking about both the industry or the problems they want to disrupt, and how good or bad is their idea really.
That's great, thank you. So Aziz wants to know, what did you learn from your startup companies? What advice would you give us for new startups that we want to start?
So there's 5 important things in a startup. Number 1 is the team. Number 2 is the team. Number 3 is the team. You can see where this is going. Number 4 is, what value can your idea actually create? In other words, does it solve a real problem? What's your idea? And then number 5 is, do you really have all the skills and things in place to do it, to actually execute on the idea? But the most important thing, and as a venture capitalist, I really spent most of my time making an investment decision and, teaching my investment colleagues to really look at the team. Because if the team has experience, and if the team is flexible enough to pivot and know when they need to pivot and not have their identity and their ego tied up in their idea. And third, if they're willing to work together in a collaborative way to solve problems, then it almost doesn't matter what the original business plan idea is. And 8 times out of 10, the business that you're going to be in is probably not the one that you thought when you started the company. And there's a joke in Silicon Valley that no business plan survives first contact with a customer. So I think really it is all about how good are the set of people you pull together to go do this startup journey with you. Because it's really hard. Raising money is the most humiliating thing you can do on the planet, because the investor's job is to totally disassemble you, to totally shake any semblance of confidence you have, and to basically get you into a quivering blob and then negotiate the funding arrangement. So it's a really difficult process.
I think we all want to do it now.
You should. It's great.
Kind of going off of that question, my question that I like to ask, and I've asked Professor Shield this, and I've asked Professor Huang this, so I'm going to ask you is, what if somebody doesn't feel like they're creative or innovative? What if somebody doesn't feel like they're going to be the next Steve Jobs, or they're going to make the next best widget? How can they still get involved in innovation, even if they're timid about it?
Well, actually, there's far more non-Steve Jobs than there are Steve Jobs, right? I mean, there's maybe 10 in my career. There's Steve, there's Bill, there's Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, the evil Zuckerberg, and I can name them all, right? There's 10. So most of the people that do innovation are actually pretty quiet and pretty humble. I think, though, the direct answer is there's lots of ways. You can be an activist, right? You can fight for what's right through a non-government organization. You can become a policymaker, either in a government position or in a government think tank, or a support organization. Multinational corporations don't like Steve Jobs personalities, right? They're really disruptive. So most of the innovation that goes on in Procter and Gamble and, IBM and, many other companies is done by just really conscientious, quote, normal people. So you can also become part of a startup, because a startup needs a whole team, and you need visionaries, and you need people to do the work, and you need advisors, and you need people to be critics. So I think there's innovation opportunities in every organization on the planet.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we have a hand up. I hope I don't mess up your name. Is it Shawani?
Yeah, that was perfect,
Hey,
actually.
Perfect.
Hi, Professor. I just thought of this question, and I really am curious as to what you think, but what are your thoughts on Bill Gates's proposed idea of the smart city he wants to build in Arizona?
Well, there's been many attempts at that. And are you familiar with Google Sidewalk or Sidewalk Labs? So definitely Sidewalk Labs was pursuing this in a big way. I think Bill's goals are a little more rational and realistic than Sidewalk Labs, although I've always been impressed with the work Sidewalk Labs have done. So I think the core issue about urban planning is, how do you fix an existing city? And if you want to read an incredible book about this, it's a book called Scale, and it's by Jeffrey West, who's here in Santa Fe. He's at the Santa Fe Institute, where I get to do a little bit of work. And Jeffrey wrote an amazing book about why do cities succeed and corporations don't, right? Cities last centuries, corporations, if they're lucky, are 100 years, right? So I think more power to Bill. If you look at the 2030 project in Saudi Arabia, that's trying to do it as well. It's a hard problem, because how do you plan a community when a community is really the sum of the people who live there? So that's the problem. But you certainly could make the infrastructure better. You could make it more efficient. You could, do the whole recycling of water and energy and power. So there's a lot of space to improve how we live and how we work. So more power to them. I think I wish Bill luck, and I was I heard a presentation about it about 2 months ago. So I think it's pretty exciting.
So I went ahead and put in the chat the link to the Amazon of the Scale book. I hope it's the correct one. It looked like it probably was. So if you guys want to check that out, that link is in the chat. Also, Pedro mentioned Sidewalk Labs has a good newsletter. So if you're really interested, definitely check that out as well. Any other questions? We still have about 20 minutes. Does anyone have anything?
Well, there's a lot in the chat.
There's a lot of chatting going on. Kelly mentioned and Les mentioned that they both used some great topics from the class. Kelly said she used them during her internship this summer, so that's awesome.
Cool. Excellent.
And yeah, I guess I have a question, another one for you. So this, coming from working in the CMC, I have to wonder how much of your career was based on your network, was based on, you being able to get jobs because you knew people, because you were at the right place at the right time, talking to people, or how much of it was just you applying or you asking around?
So does everyone know what Myers-Briggs is? It's a personality rating system, and it has 4 quadrants. So many of you may be able to guess, but I am an INTJ. And that first letter, I, is introvert. I am a horrific networker. If my consulting business depended on me making calls, I would starve. So I think being in the right place at the right time is actually even more important than networking. Now, networking can help because networking can open doors, but being at the right place at the right time, and that, is partially luck, it's partially skill in what jobs do you pick when. And my big break, which I think helped me my entire career, is that my first job got to be at Xerox PARC, right? Because PARC, invented so much stuff. And so every company on the planet wanted to get some help from Xerox PARC, which is why Steve called me, right? Because he did some searching. He needed someone who had been away from Xerox for a little while, but still knew it all and knew all the people. So that's why I actually got called. But after that, it's largely about, what do you do? And what accomplishments can you point to? And my personal view, this is subjective, is, are you humble about your accomplishments? Because you can go be a bull in a china shop like Elon Musk, and that's one path to success. But you can also just do good work, document it really well, get permission to share the work, in a small paper that you might publish, you might not. But I think basically it's about, what have you done and what can you show future employers what you're capable of? And then the networking is important because they're going to call all the people you worked for before. And so basically, don't ever burn a bridge if you can help it, because everyone you've ever worked for is a potential reference. And any smart recruiter is going to ignore the references you give them. They're going to call those people, but what they're going to do is get another name. Well, who else can I talk to about so-and-so? So I think networking isn't that important. Although I will say that the bonds you develop in a program like the MGM or the MBA programs here at Thunderbird will actually serve you well, because the most valuable bonds I've seen is where people went to school with someone, which is a great grounding of, oh yeah, I remember you, right? So gather every network you can, keep track of your fellow students. I kind of regret that I didn't do that in high school, although I kept track with some of them. So anyway, long answer to a short question.
Well, thank you. And Camilla, I really appreciate the fact that you're being so honest right now. Definitely, there's a lot of things going on with trying to find jobs and trying to change careers and making adjustments. And so I know that that's super important, and we're all, if we're not going through it right this second, we will be, or we have been. So it's definitely something that we've all experienced. Jarind asked another question and said, what do you think is the most interesting consulting job or consulting industry for an innovator?
Oh gosh, don't consult. I mean, consulting can be very fun and engaging and rewarding, but your problem as a consultant is you have to separate giving advice from doing it. And if you're a builder or a creator, that can be difficult. So if you're happy just giving an advice and you're kind of open to whether they take it or not, then consulting is a good path. If you like actually making things happen, one of the most frustrating things I've ever done was as a consultant to McKinsey. It was a root canal without anesthetic. I mean, I loved it. I was honored to work on the projects that I got to work on, but being part of a large consulting firm is really difficult if you're truly innovative, because what a consulting firm wants is for everyone to be a robot replicating whatever their skill set is, whether you're McKinsey or Deloitte or BCG, right? They all kind of have a different place. I think if you want to just join a design firm of some kind, whether it's user experience or user interface design or industrial design or fashion design or product design, design firms are actually the most fun places to be as a consultant, because the work you're doing there is going to wind up in the product.
That's great. That's really interesting too. Any other questions? We do have time. I know Camilla said, as Marvin Gaye said, there's only 3 things for sure: taxes, death, and trouble.
Trouble, yes.
I mean, so, I don't know. Some people don't pay their taxes.
Right. Well, 2 of those you can't really do anything about, but you can certainly creatively and constructively create trouble. I mean, my role at everywhere I've worked is, if 20% of the people hate me and 80% of the people love me, then I'm doing fine. And so if you're doing things, you're going to get people that disagree with you, think you've wrecked their careers or whatever. So seek trouble. Trouble is a good thing. So just be ethical about it.
Right. So I'll be working at Amazon when I graduate, and I'll be in operations. And so for me, going to Amazon, obviously they're huge. They're continuously innovating. They're continuously doing things. So what would you say to just anyone who is going into a large company about innovation? Because of course we're one piece of a giant machine. So how would you go about innovating and making change within a large company that's already doing so much already?
Well, you're lucky you're going to Amazon.
I don't know.
because,
That's what I keep hearing from some people, but others
well,
are not as supportive. But I'm
well,
super excited.
it's a difficult working environment, and so there will be parts of it which will be very difficult, because it's kind of relentless and it's very demanding. But the good news is Amazon is open to ideas from most anywhere. So anytime you go to work for a big company, your most important resource in whether you're going to get to be innovative or not is, did you pick your boss well? And you don't always get to pick your boss. And the few times I've gone to a company and found out I didn't have a good boss, I worked really hard to do all the things they needed me to do, but I spent all my extra energy finding the better boss and making that move. So I think that's the most important thing, is who do you work for and how open are they to soliciting change? Because they're going to be your first line of blocking or supporting anything. The second thing is, most large corporations do have an alternative method to solicit employee feedback. Take advantage of those, whether those are volunteering for quality circles or volunteering to be on a task force. Even if you're, starting doing the grunt work, do that. Every company that I've ever been at, if there was, like at Xerox, when I was at Xerox PARC, there was a task force to decide whether Xerox should stay in the computer business or not. They had bought a company called Xerox Data Systems, and they were kind of looking around for people who wanted to go, spend what would be 4 months working on that task force. My arm went up in a second. And so anytime you have that kind of opportunity to work on a strategic initiative, go do it, because that'll give you experience, it'll give you visibility, and it is the one path to get out from under a boss who may not be so supportive of innovation.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions.
Great.
Dorinda asks again, let's say you were a recruiter or an HR manager. How would you pick out your innovators at an interview?
So you're interviewing and trying to select who is the most innovative of a set of candidates. Is that the question? Just make sure I understand it.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think if, it depends where they are in their career, right? Because if they're a new grad, then you really got to depend on what do they tell you they did in school, right? What were their internships? What projects? Do they have any examples of their project work? Because at that point, you don't have a track record yet. So all the recruiter can go on is how excited you are, how positive you are, how honest you are, and how quickly and sharply you can answer questions, and what work can you put in front of them to say, here's some things I've done, right? If you're later in your career, it becomes a lot easier, because all they got to do is call the last company you worked for, and they will find a way to do that, right? Whether you give them the name as a reference or not, any good HR person is going to do some background work. And then the innovative people sort out pretty quickly, because then it was, what difference did that person make in the organization, which is the number one question. And so you want to focus on always having a portfolio of what difference did you make? What only happened because you were there? Does that make sense?
Awesome. Thank you. So Sana wants to know if you have any stories about IDEO.
I have so many IDEO stories. Has anyone had the ability to do an internship at IDEO? If you get the chance. So IDEO is an industrial design firm. It is the merger of two companies, ID and EO. ID was founded by Bill Mugridge, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And Bill Mugridge was one of my best friends. I got Bill to come from the UK to Silicon Valley to set up his design firm, ID, which was called ID2, because he still had the firm in London. David Kelly, who was the founder of EO, which was another design firm, I knew but didn't know him quite so well. The idea, I believe, when they first had the conversation about merging ID and EO into IDEO, happened on my back deck. David Kelly, Bill Mugridge, Mike Nuttall, John Allenby, just a whole range of people. We were having a big barbecue party for all the designers in town. What was called Bay Chi, which was the Computer Human Interaction Conference, was just happening. And that night I invited everyone over to my house for a great big barbecue. And Bill has told me, although David hasn't ever confirmed it, that they're sitting on my back deck over a glass of wine was where they first started having the conversation about merging the two firms. So I've been lucky to do a lot of projects with IDEO over the years. But Bill Mugridge, if you look him up, he was really important in how IDEO evolved. So that's one of many stories I have, and we probably don't have time for too many more.
Awesome. That's a great one. So CJ wants to know, how have you found teaching your course online? And he says, I've seen classes that don't really lend themselves to online medium. So how are you handling that?
So it's hard. It's flat. It is a lot more fun to be in the same room where you can have the social dynamics and chemistry, interaction, and your excitement is a lot easier to spread than it is on our little two-dimensional Zoom thing here. So I still try to do it. I mean, I try to use my voice to show what I'm really excited about, but online is hard. I've had to really learn, luckily though, I've always been in the corporate world where we had the most advanced technology because of the places I've worked. So for me, online wasn't new. Even if you were in the Silicon Valley and you could have walked down to the conference room, 9 times out of 10, you may still have had the meeting via Zoom or its predecessors. So for me, it's kind of a natural platform, but it's really hard. And I can't wait until we have a treatment, we have a vaccine, and we can get this whole thing behind us. So what I try to do is just be engaging, keep the chat going, stop frequently, ask people if they have any questions. And I put people on the spot because I'll say something like, let's just pick someone here. Francis, can you tell me about XYZ, right? Or what do you think?
And I'll say, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, you got to keep the engagement up.
I'll say that Les Kelly and I were in his first class at Thunderbird, which was last spring. And so we had all just gone online. It was his first time teaching this first class. And so, I mean, it was an adjustment for all of us, of course, but you're learning so much anyway. And his PowerPoints are packed with information. His stories are absolutely off the wall incredible. And so if we could do it the very first time teaching and going through this COVID thing, I'm sure now it's just second nature to him. Plus, when you get into the real world, or whatever with our jobs, we'll be working like this anyway. Yeah. So it's definitely a good way to still be able to flex your innovation, still be able to work with a group to come up with a great product and project and be in this class. And of course, we would love to be in person, but until we can do that, it's this and that's it.
It's what we got.